Join former FBI senior forensic examiners Becky Passmore and Stacey Eldridge as they dig into the world of digital forensics, one bite at a time. Now leading their own consulting firms and educating the next generation of cyber sleuths, these badass babes of digital forensics bring sharp insight, real-world case experience, and a dose of humor to the bits and bytes that build today's investigations. From deep dives into business email compromise and ransomware attacks, Becky's specialty, to cracking the complexities of iPhone forensics, Stacey's obsession, this podcast delivers insider knowledge for professionals, students, and true crime techies alike. If you've ever wondered what really happens when the digital trail is all that's left, tune in and start parsing the truth.
Parsing the Truth, one bite at a time, is proud to welcome our first sponsor, Ace Forensics. They are based near Chicago, and they've been building systems since 1983. Ace Forensics delivers high-performance digital forensics workstations, laptops, and servers to justice agencies across the United States and around the world. They offer unmatched value and the industry's only 5-year digital forensics warranty. Ace Forensics build the systems your digital forensics software deserves. If you're procuring digital forensics equipment, reach out to them for a competitive quote. Now, on to our episode. Welcome back to Parsing the Truth, one bite at a time. I'm Stacey Eldridge, and with me, as always, is my co-host, Becky Passmore. We are the true crime podcast that focuses on the digital forensics in today's modern crimes. Our focus is on the facts and the artifacts that today's digital forensic examiners are finding or not finding in today's digital evidence. Becky, what are we doing tonight?
So hello, everyone. Today we are continuing our coverage of the first Karen Read trial, but with a twist. Tonight we have a special guest with us. Very excited. If you've been keeping up to date, we just spent the last 2 episodes talking about his testimony in the first Karen Read trial. So tonight we're going to go a little deeper, dig a little deeper as we welcome our guest on this podcast, Ian Whiffin from Cellebrite. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
So, Ian, as we get started, can you share a little bit about your current role and a little bit about your digital forensics background with our listeners?
Sure. So I've always been a geek, essentially. I was working in IT back in 2000, 2001. 2004, I made the move and joined the police in the UK. I spent 5 years working patrol before moving to Canada. And continuing to work in a response role. In 2013, I joined the digital forensics team and spent the next 7 or 8 years working in digital forensics. Essentially, any case, any device would come to my team, and I was one of the examiners there who handled that. And then in 2020, I made the move and joined Cellebrite, initially as a subject matter expert. I did that for 2.5, 3 years. And then moved into decoding product manager. And then more recently, I've made a move over to customer experience, and I'm one of the customer engagement managers.
Yeah, very nice. So if we have a problem when we're using Cellebrite and we contact Cellebrite, we might come across one of your team members.
You may well do. Typically, my team is more focused on helping understand artifacts from the forensic point of view, rather than like the software crashed or the license is expired or anything like that. We'll tackle the actual forensics issues.
Awesome. Very good. All right. Well, we have a round of questions that we're going to throw your way, so we'll get started. So we know your involvement in this case all began with a question about the house long to die in cold search. Now, from the trial, we know several questions come into Cellebrite through support channels, kind of like what you were talking about. But during your interview with Heather Barnhart, you shared that a podcaster had contacted you about this case. So how did all that play out?
Yes, kind of mid to late 2023, when the Host Long to Die search started to really make the news and to get the attention on Twitter and things. There was a true crime podcaster who reached out to Cellebrite, to our public relations team, essentially asking, does Cellebrite have a comment about this search, which your tool found? Public relations got in touch with me, said, do you know anything about this case? At the time, I didn't. I reached out, contacted the investigators. They'd actually lodged a ticket with our support team, uploaded the data, so I was able to access the data, take a look at what was causing the confusion, do my own testing with my own devices, come to my own conclusion, and then reached out back to the investigators with a video, with a document explaining this is how the timestamp is created, this is what it actually means. And of course, as soon as you put pen to paper on a case like that, you're almost guaranteed to get called to testify.
Yeah.
So that was never really my intention going into this. I just wanted to help explain this artifact. But it didn't die. It continued to be talked about. So eventually, obviously, I had to go and testify at court related to this timestamp.
And so was it kind of the local agency that was like, we want you to come testify about this, or was it the prosecutor, or was it kind of everybody meeting together and hashing it out to figure out how to handle this?
So initially my communication was with the investigators. Then it turned into a conversation with the prosecutors, and it was the prosecutors who were just like, we need you to come and testify.
Gotcha.
Prosecutors love subject matter experts. They sure do. Yes, they do.
So I assume your testing and all the work that you had to do went through several stages, but do you have any idea in terms of, just for the first trial, because we know you had to testify in the second trial, and I don't know if you kind of kept it separate, but do you have any idea on how many hours you spent doing your testing regarding the artifacts involved in this case, and like anything else you had to get ready to do as you're getting ready to go to trial?
I never really kept a log of it, but
oh, that must be nice.
This was just, I sat down and just worked at it.
Yeah.
Initially, looking at the data to begin with was maybe an hour or so. Actually getting the test data and figuring out what had happened was probably about another hour or so. But then it started to really take time, kind of writing that report up, getting multiple devices. I think I ended up testing 10 different versions of iOS.
Wow.
So having to replicate the same test 10 times and then do the same research on all of those. And of course, there are differences between these. So then that led down new rabbit holes to try and explain the differences between versions and then, figure all that out. So I'd say probably for the first trial, the ballpark of 10 or 12 hours just to do the initial testing, research, writing the report. But then there was also, in preparation for trial, making sure that the software wasn't going to crash, making sure that I was 1,000% confident in what I was about to demonstrate, both in terms of the data and the conclusions that I'd come to, but also the steps that I was going to take, and that it wasn't going to crash any software or take too long, or could be explained correctly. So yeah.
Well, and I do think it was good that you tested many different versions of iOS with regards to, the browser state, DB, and the artifacts coming from there, because they did ask you on cross-examination there, asking the questions about the apples to apples comparison and stuff. And you were on a slightly different iOS, but you were able to come back and say, look, I tested all of these different iOS versions, and from this one to this one, it was consistent. So
yeah, I think many examiners have got a cache of devices, right, that you can test and play with. It's unlikely that everyone's going to have the exact version that you need, and trying to find that device is a nightmare. So I did the best I could at the time, tested several versions of iOS 15 and then 16, 17, and 18. Just to show they were all consistent. So at the very least, this is the expected behavior, and try to extrapolate to say this is more than likely what happened on 15.2.1. And it did explain everything. That was, I think, the important point, that contextually it made sense that it was the same result.
Yeah, for sure.
But I think you also had another good point about the test devices. I mean, depending on your organization, some of them have a lot, and I have a couple, and I'm always asking my friends, I'm like, can I have your old iPhone? Can I have your old Android? Can I have that? So I can build up my little cache test. Some people give me their phones. They do. And I'm like, look, if AT&T was going to give you $5 for your trade-in, I will give you 10. How about that? Sort of sweeten the pot for them as well. But to get it, even if you get the correct physical iPhone, to get it back down to the right iOS after all of the updates, and you can go and kind of do the hard reset and load something on. But even to get those other versions, you can only still go back so far as I can tell. If there's some other trick to go back way further, I don't know what it is.
No, very limited in the versions you can go back.
Yeah. So We all love trial prep. So tell us what your trial prep was like.
This one wasn't that much different from normal for the first trial.
Mhm.
Really came down to, again, rereading my report multiple times to make sure I kind of knew what was in there and picking it apart myself to see, are there any weak points to this that will be questioned? Obviously, there was some. I was pretty confident about everything that I thought I had an answer for. Again, testing the software was the big one on this. This was the first time I've done a live demonstration. I was more
Whose
panicked.
idea was that? That is my big question. When we saw that live demo go up, I was like jaw dropping. I was like, oh my God, I can't believe you're going to do this, because, live demos are
Notoriously
are risky. Yeah. Even on a good day.
Trying to rely on shaky internet connection through like a hotspot in there to a jailbroken phone, and then it's the software that I've written it. I've got a lot of trust in it. I've been using it a long time, but it's software. It still crashes sometimes. So yeah, that was the scariest part leading up to it, and the number of times I ran that test again and again and again, just hoping that it was going to be smooth. And trying to iron out and find any little bugs that could creep up. I didn't want to spend 10 minutes at trial in the debug window trying to figure out what was going on.
Right.
Yeah.
So
they'll be like, he can't even figure out how to run his computer. How can we trust his testimony?
Initially, I'd done that video demonstration for the investigators. That was a video that was sent to prosecution. It was disclosed to defense. So everyone had already seen this demonstration.
Okay. It was not new for the first time.
It was not new. And there was questions about whether I'd be allowed to actually do it live on the stand or not.
Mm-hmm.
But prosecutors pushed for it, and everyone eventually allowed it.
So, speaking of that live demo, you used your tool Artex, and some people may be wondering whether it can also be used on Android devices to review data like during your live demo. Do the phones have to be jailbroken or rooted in order to use it? And where can people download Artex?
Okay. So fundamentally, it was meant to be an iOS forensic tool that I started writing back in, I think, 2018 or 2019. The live connection feature I added early 2020 for iOS for jailbroken devices. Just recently, like within the last 6 to 8 months, I've started looking at Android as well.
Okay.
So it will ingest Android or some Android extractions. It will, at the moment, parse very minimal data. I'm still working on the parsers, but you can do a live connection to a rooted Android device and do the same kind of thing where you can use the device and then look at the databases or the ABX files or whatever the file is that's on the device. So yeah, that does work. And it's available on my website, doubleblack.com. BLAK.
We'll link to that in our show notes.
But if you are using it, you might want to link to it in your case notes.
That's right.
That's true.
All right. Let's get into some more of the technical. This is probably what everybody's been waiting for. So we're going to dig in to a little bit of the work you did regarding that house long to die in cold search and in regards to the browserstate.db. Now, in our community, I don't think there's enough education about WAL files that go along with the SQLite databases. And I think there's probably some misunderstanding about the artifacts that can be found in the WAL files themselves. So the first question I wanted to ask you is everything in a WAL file a deleted record?
It is not, no. Definitely
so it can be records that are still active, or it can be deleted. It can contain either one.
I mean, I think you're right. There's a lot of misunderstanding about the WAL file in general. And it's actually, I think, quite a simple concept. Like, when you start to understand it, it makes a lot of sense. But it is complicated from a technical point of view, but the concept behind it is quite simple. And essentially, every time a record is added, edited, or deleted from the database, it goes into the WAL file first. Right? So we have a collection of records in the WAL that haven't been applied to the main database yet. So, for example, I might have a page within the database which has 10 records. I add a new record to the database, and it will copy the page from the database into the WAL file and append my additional record. Now, for a normal database viewing tool that includes the WAL at the same time, it will take that page from the WAL. So it'll be the latest version of that page. So you'll have 11 records. If I exclude the WAL and just read the database on its own, obviously that additional record that's been added to the WAL won't be in the database itself. And it works both ways. So if I have a page in the database with 10 records and then delete a record, that page is duplicated into the WAL minus the record I deleted. So again, when you read it using a normal database viewer, it includes the page from the WAL as the latest version, and you are missing a record. And essentially, this goes on over time. You end up with multiple duplicate pages within the WAL. Some of those pages will have additional records. Some will have less records because records have been deleted. And again, from a normal database viewer's point of view, it will take the latest copy of that page, which may have missing records or deleted records that no longer exist. But forensically speaking, if you use something like Physical Analyzer or Artex or any other forensic tool, it can go back in time and read all of the previous versions of that page within the WAL file and find the records that have been deleted. So although WAL files are a really good source of deleted data from databases, simply being in a WAL file doesn't mean it's a deleted record. I think that explains it.
Yeah, no, I think that's good. Because they're working together, and basically you need both of them to work. And if you just look at one without the other, you could potentially be missing data.
Yeah, you'll definitely miss data if you're not looking at both. But you could also be missing data if you don't look at one. Like we have cases where the WAL file essentially includes the instructions to delete everything that's in the database. And if you read the database with the WAL, you'll see no live records. But if you exclude the WAL, all of those records exist because they've not been told to be deleted. So they can work both ways. To include or exclude the WAL is useful.
Well, and it's important to know how your forensic tools specifically work when dealing with, the databases and the WAL files. And I'm old, so generally I just go straight out to a database and I work it different ways. And I have Sanderson's forensic tool as well that I use. So I can I decide what I'm doing, and I am I looking at the live records of the database? Am I incorporating the WAL? What am I doing here? But I just learned last week when I was in training that for Axiom, they said that when you are looking at the SQLite database in their tool, they have like a simple viewer. They said they are incorporating the WAL file into what you are seeing when you are looking at the SQLite database. So if you thought it was just the live or just the database files and not the WAL, you might have to go back and look at some of that stuff. Know how your tools work if you're relying on them for your data and how they are presenting the data to you.
Definitely. And in that kind of vein, Physical Analyzer will show you the database with the WAL applied, but then with a button that will carve out additional records from the WAL. Artex will have a tab for both with the WAL or without the WAL, so you can see it both ways at the same time. Ooh. Yeah, the entire tool is, every time I, as an examiner, have come against a new challenge, the feature that addresses it. And that was a feature that, I came up with a while ago, so I thought this would be really useful for doing database work.
Wow.
Yeah,
that's great.
Yeah, because then you could just easily flip back and forth. That would be so amazing to just have it right there in the tool instead of having different, because sometimes you just want to look at a quick thing here and there instead of all the different things open.
Like you can write your own query and it will apply it to both versions of the table. It's like to the with WAL and without WAL at the same time, and a combined view and an advanced view. And it does quite a few things.
That's awesome.
That's great. Yeah. I like it.
Now, obviously, I don't use Cellebrite, but you do. So when Cellebrite is parsing or recovering artifacts from the WAL files, what do users need to be aware of when reviewing those artifacts in Cellebrite? And onto this, from what I've heard, there's some confusion about there can be a red X icon associated with the artifacts that are recovered from a WAL file. And so some people think it always means deleted, but maybe it doesn't. So if you want to kind of give us some tips regarding that, I think that would be great.
So we have a flag within the table, not within the database table, within the parsed data view. And that flag will tell you whether it's an intact record, so it's a live record. It will tell you if it's deleted. I always say it's deleted and recovered, because if you don't recover it, then there's no record there at all. So this is where the red X comes in. You'll see a red X that says this is a deleted record, but we recovered it. There's a trash can icon, essentially to say this record has been deleted, but is not deleted. Something like photographs, when you send it to the recycle bin for 30 days. So it's technically a deleted record, but it's not actually a deleted record in terms of database and database recovery. And then, there's an unknown state as well, just in case we're not sure for whatever reason.
So is there anything, so we've kind of got some of those icons down. Is there anything that the examiners need to be specifically aware of when they're looking at those WAL files, when they're using Cellebrite?
Not
we already covered that.
Yeah, we just covered it. Again, if you see that it comes from a WAL file, it doesn't necessarily mean it's deleted. You can go in and check the database and see whether it's actually a deleted record by viewing the live data and searching for the record you want.
Yeah, makes sense.
It sounds like you can do that easy peasy in Artex.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That's right. All right, so tell us more about your research and findings regarding the browserstate.db and its purpose. If you could just walk us through a scenario where people could understand what's happening as a user is browsing in Safari, and what and when they might see artifacts actually written into that browserstate.db as a live record versus what they may be seeing in a WAL file.
Okay. How browser state works in iOS 14 first, and then move on to 15. There was a big change between 14 and 15, and I think that caused some of the confusion in this case with how this database functioned. So in iOS 14, you open Safari, create a new tab, and at that point in time, a record is created in the browser state database in the tabs table that says this tab is open. And there's a timestamp that shows the time the tab was opened. There's also a field called URL, and that gets populated with the web address that's being visited. As I continue to use Safari and visit different web pages and navigate around, the URL in the database is updated constantly, but the timestamp remains when the tab was opened. If I close Safari completely and reopen it, or if I change between different tabs, that's when the timestamp gets updated. But navigation itself doesn't cause that timestamp to change. If I minimize Safari and reopen it, that doesn't cause the timestamp to change either. So essentially in iOS 14, every time you navigate to a different web page, the database is being updated. And I think that is quite a lot of I/O for the device to handle, really. Right into the database, like it's filling up the while, it's causing checkpoints every 10 minutes. So in iOS 15, this changed. And instead of writing that record to the database when the tab was opened, it waited until the tab was closed. So now in iOS 15 and above, you create a tab and everything's held in RAM, right? So the timestamp and the URL that you're visiting is purely held in RAM. You navigate around as much as you want, nothing gets written to the database. When you eventually close that tab, that's when the record with the original timestamp when the tab took focus and the most recent URL that was visited get written to the database in one go, essentially. So, whereas in iOS 14, you can do record recovery and see every page that was visited within this session or within this tab. In iOS 15, you can no longer do that because it's only a single record that shows the most recent web address that was visited.
And it sounds like in iOS 14, it would have basically been a very close mirror to what you might have seen in the history.db for Safari.
Essentially, yes. You'd be able to look at them both and correlate between them.
Yeah. And this is why it's so important for people to understand what version of iOS they're looking at.
Absolutely. The fact that research can be done one day and it can be completely different a few days later.
Yeah. And we're always, it's not very often. Well, at least for me, by the time it comes to the defense side, it's not like I'm getting a brand spanking new case. I'm going back many, many iOS versions on many old devices. So, you've got to stay up to date, but you have to have the ability to look backwards in time and see what was happening when it was on this iOS versus this iOS that is current today. And so with regards to, obviously so you're saying that it's basically tracking where you're going and what's happening with your tabs in RAM now instead of writing every single record to the browser state.
There's also a session tab as well, which will track each of the pages that's visited within the session. I believe that's written at the same time as the tab record. Didn't actually check that thinking about it now.
But that's all right.
The session would give you a little bit more information about the pages that were visited since that tab was opened. Now, unfortunately, in this particular case, because it was a deleted record and the blob that held that session data was so huge, it couldn't be reconstructed. So there was a lot of data that was overwritten. We weren't able to pull the entire session data out from that.
And that session data, that's when you keep that tab open that whole entire time. And so depending on how people use their phones, right? Some people might just use one tab over and over and over again, never closing the tab, never closing Safari, versus other people like me who have like 50 tabs open on their phone, on their computers, and switching between them all constantly.
Yeah, exactly. And it's probably important to note as well, when I say that the session was huge, I mean in terms of number of pages of the database that it took. And the pages are only a few K each. So it doesn't take that long before it starts to spill over into multiple pages. And it only takes one of those pages that's deleted now to be overwritten, and you can't recover essentially any of them.
That's a good point regarding the size.
Yeah, can't think of the word I was going to use. Relative.
Relative. It's relative. Yeah. And then, so speaking of the changes that was kind of happening between 14 and 15, and I know you mentioned the session table that was in the browserstate.db contains more data, but where are all of the open tabs that allows the tracking, like, the seamless experience before your devices? Where would people go and look for that sort of information?
So there's two of the databases that's in the same folder as Browser State. There's Safari tabs and Cloud tabs. And Cloud tabs is the one that will synchronize across all devices, but it doesn't necessarily have that much history in there.
And that's probably because it's just serving a purpose of, I'm going to get all of this stuff synchronized across all the different devices. And I think that's one thing to keep in mind is like, what is the purpose of this thing?
Absolutely.
Based on its purpose, what can we expect to see?
Yeah, I try to tell people this all the time. Like, if you understand why that data is being recorded, it's not being recorded for us. It's being recorded for Apple's purposes, right? So if you understand why it's recorded, you'll have a good grasp of how reliable it is, what it actually means contextually, and how important it actually is to the case.
Sometimes I kind of worry as we talk about stuff and it comes up in big trials, like, is Apple tracking all of this? And they're like, we're going to see what we can do to get rid of these artifacts so the digital forensic examiners can't look at them anymore.
Absolutely. We'll just see that a lot.
We're going to change it in the next iOS version. That's exactly what they're thinking. Right. Yeah. So during the first trial, you mentioned that House Long to Die in Cold didn't actually appear on the screen until 10:33 a.m. You mentioned that it took a little bit more work to figure it out. So can you tell us a little bit more about how this timestamp came about and where it came from?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'll ignore the 227 timestamp altogether now because that one's been, in my opinion, thoroughly debunked. So there was the mobile Safari.p list that had the recent searches, and that had the record of how long to die in cikd, followed by how long to die in the cold. That was at 6:23:52 and then 6:24 and change. I can't remember the exact times. Neither of those records was present in the history database, where we'd obviously normally expect to see any visitor page. So it took some time to figure out, well, why is it not in there? I knew it hadn't been deleted because there was no missing records in terms of the row IDs. I knew it wasn't done within a private browsing mode, because if private browsing was on, then we'd have no record of it in the mobile Safari P list. So I was trying to understand, first of all, why is it not in the history database? And determined that was because the page never loaded. If you try to access a page and then close it before it completely loads, it will not show up in your history, in the database or within the screen's list of history items. These records also appeared in the KnowledgeC database under web usage artifacts. So we had two timestamps for how long to die in the cikd, which were both at 623, 624. And then how long to die, Host long to die in cold had a timestamp of 1033. KnowledgeC isn't showing you navigation history. It's not telling you this is when the page loaded. It's not telling you, the user went here at this time. All it's telling you is this is what Safari is currently trying to show. So at 1033, Safari was reopened by the user, and it showed the previously loaded screen, which was trying to load host long time cold. So that was actually the first record of web usage recording that particular web address. What was also good in this case, the title field in browser state was blank.
Oh, okay.
It was a Google search, and when you do a Google search, the title is Google dash and then the contents that you've searched for. So that's populated when the page downloads and processes. The fact that it was blank in the database was additional evidence that the page never loaded.
Yeah, that's a great point. You walked us through a lot of things like you're thinking of connecting the dots. And that's what we have to do with so much of our evidence, so many of the artifacts. We can't just be like, depending on what you need to demonstrate in your case or disprove in your case, you can't just be like, timestamp, URL, case closed. You did a lot of the correlating of the artifacts across a lot of different databases. You got a plist involved, and then you're examining all of the different fields that were present. Kind of in your initial approach to everything, is this kind of how you were working it from the beginning, or were you just kind of more focused on like, what is the significance of, this timestamp of 2:27 a.m. being in the browser state DB, and then you kind of had to connect all the dots, or did you have to do a lot more digging once you knew you were going to be in the hot seat and having to write that report?
No, I think I was taking that approach all along.
Yeah.
I've been doing forensics from Safari for years. I know that the mobile Safari.plist is a reliable source. I know that history usually is, but I've never seen it do this before, where a record was completely missing at the same time as being obviously should have been there. So in this case, there was artifacts that just didn't make sense. The 227 timestamp didn't make sense. And to me, it was actually quite a new artifact. We'd only added it to Physical Analyzer in late 2022, I believe, or early 2022. It was a relatively new artifact. It's not one that I've really used before. So suddenly now I've got several data sources on the phone that I've used for years that I trust, that I can easily test and validate are still good. And I've got this new one, which is untested and that shows, or untested by myself, and it shows something that's at odds with what I know to be true. So I really wanted to focus on, why is this 227 timestamp there? What does it mean? How does it get populated? And how relevant is it?
Well, and it was probably compounded by the fact that there was at least 2 cases where people had came to Cellebrite and been like, hey, what's up with this timestamp? So you knew other people were questioning it too. It wasn't just you.
So there was another case that I was made aware of, but it was after I'd already done this.
Oh, it was? Okay.
Yeah. So I did the analysis for this case, sent that away. Was in the process of discussing it with the forensic research group to get the decoding in Physical Analyzer updated. And then another examiner came forward saying, hey, have you ever seen this before? This doesn't make sense. The timestamp can't be right. So I walked through it with him and explained, this is very similar to another case I've just worked. This is the conclusion I came to there. And it all made sense for him too.
Oh, wow. That's great.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, and you said in that one, wasn't it in Austria? And you said, I don't know who came first. I think the law enforcement agency came to you first, and then the defense expert came to you a little bit afterwards with basically the same question.
Yes. This was in the Karen Reed case. Yeah, the prosecution came in, I think, September. And then it was a few months later that defense came with the same question.
Oh, I guess I misunderstood it.
I got the wrong way around. Defense came first. Yeah, so defense contacted support first.
In the Karen Reed trial.
The Karen Reed trial.
Okay.
Yeah. Defense contacted support asking, what does this timestamp mean? This is my understanding. Can you confirm it? As I said earlier, we have our team, which are responsible for helping with the forensic artifacts, and another team that help with software problems. He contacted the software problem team, and they told him to contact my team, and that never happened.
Okay.
So I wasn't aware of this particular ticket that had been opened in support until much later, when I was actually trying to find the prosecutor's request.
Gotcha.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Then I'm curious, just, I know my support experience with other tools and stuff. Like when people are coming to you with these questions, like, is there an average turnaround, like a day or two, or we're talking like weeks and months?
So the technical support team have, it does depend. The technical support team have like a full turnaround expectation chart, etc.
Yeah.
My team, not so much.
Uh-huh.
Like some of the answers we can get back to you within a few minutes. Some will take a lot longer. Like some of them do require like getting test devices, getting test software set up, doing multiple tests across long periods of time. So that can take weeks sometimes to get an answer to somebody.
Well, and you've got to test and validate it enough to have an accurate answer.
Yeah, we have to figure it out, test it, validate it, communicate it back, and then eventually, like, we do seek to incorporate that information we've learned into either a webinar that we'll run, a blog that we can write, change the tool if it requires something adding or changing, like it did in this case.
Mm-hmm.
So there's lots of kind of wheels that start turning when we start to look at one of those types of questions. It's
always kind of interesting to see, like, how is it working behind the scenes? What are they doing to incorporate like these questions and new things that we find out, that they find out, and get it into the tools?
I'm just curious. Do you find more challenging questions coming your way when it comes to Apple devices or Android devices?
Historically, it's been Apple, I think. We're starting to see a lot more Android devices now. But I think a lot of that comes from the type of data that people are really starting to question. Like location data is always a common question. And for a long time, like we got very little location data from Android devices compared to iOS. Mm-hmm. Now we're much better on Android. We get more questions about Android location data. Health data is another big one that we constantly get questioned about. Of course, it's in every iOS device. And it's somewhat rare in Android compared to iOS devices. So again, we'll still get more questions about iOS with that regard too.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's the difference between Apple and iOS, because on that Android stuff, a lot of that, the equivalent of the health that's not on by default, you got to take extra steps to turn it on, and you can keep it off. So that's a difference.
Just the very splintered nature of Android means that we don't get that many questions because they're so different. The questions are so varied.
Well, and I don't know what your customer base is, but I mean, in general, iOS devices, the iPhones, iPads are much more popular in the United States versus once you leave sort of like North America, Android devices are a lot more popular across the globe.
Yeah. And you're right. That could probably be part of it too. As a team, we're a lot more probably present within North America. We're a global team. We do assist other areas too, but I think, a lot of our content is predominantly consumed by American users. So we probably do kind of skew the figures that way too.
Well, you got to do what the people want, what the people need,
And so Ian, if you wanted to educate new examiners, old examiners like myself, who, I don't look at cell phones as much as Stacy does. If you wanted to educate our listeners, the community, on things to be, to watch out for, things to look into, things to keep educated on, what are some tips that you would provide?
I think really get to grips with the file systems behind what the tools show. Understand the database, understand the files. I always try and preach. The tools are great at surfacing data, but they aren't going to give you anything that they don't support, first of all, but also anything that it can't find. And sometimes the evidence is what doesn't exist on the device. So there might be a whole conversation that's being deleted or a bunch of messages that are deleted, and the tool's not going to show you that 20 messages are missing. It's just going to show you what it finds. So it'll just show you the ones that exist. And if you don't recognize that there's a lot more data to be had just by going into the files and starting to look at the file structure and the database, etc. then you're only going to be doing half a job, essentially.
The tool is not forensics. The tool is there to help parse and prepare the data. But if the
Yeah.
tool doesn't know how to parse and prepare the data, then the data's still there.
Exactly. And the tools are great at doing stuff that either you can't do yourself or don't want to do yourself. Decrypting databases is never a fun task. And if the tool can do it for me, fantastic. I'll take it.
Yeah.
So the tools are great at doing that kind of legwork, at making your job easier. But yeah, you still need to understand the background to it and know how to do the work if you don't have that tool.
Ian, I think we're getting close to the end, but I know the Karen Reed trial was crazy, number one. And number two, Karen Reed trial was probably a little bit crazier. I don't know if there's anything that maybe you didn't get to stay on the stand about the evidence that you felt should have come out and it didn't come out. And we're just talking about the first trial. Like, was there something you really wish the lawyers would have asked you on the stand and maybe they were supposed to, but they skipped a question and you didn't get to say it? I know that's happened to me sometimes.
No, I think that the biggest thing coming out of the first trial is when I heard some of the other evidence that was being presented outside of the Hoslong and thinking, that needs a little bit of help. One way or another, that's not being presented, correctly or understood or misrepresented or whatever, which is why I was more heavily involved in the second trial, looking at a wider range of data. But for the first trial, I can't think of anything that right now that I wish.
Yeah, sorry, it wasn't on the list of questions in advance. I was just kind of thinking.
Maybe the hash value was one that caught me out. Defense made a big deal about the fact that I didn't hash the extraction. I still don't believe in that particular case that it was necessary because everybody else had already hashed it and they were seeing the same data that I was seeing and the same issues. Mm-hmm. I was validating within the database itself that nothing had been modified. Like every page of the database and every frame of the wall has its own checksums, right? If you change something, the entire database will break, essentially. So I was looking at all of these kind of pointers to make sure that these databases and these files hadn't been modified. And fundamentally, my purpose in that trial was to explain this timestamp. So I didn't think it was necessary to do the entire hash extraction. I can explain on a completely separate device that I don't need to hash. This is how this timestamp is populated and what it means.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I still don't think it was necessary to hash. Got some heat, but I'll stand by that decision.
Again, defense has their strategies involved in what they're going, especially if you're a good witness, especially if you are very confident in your statements, they're going to look for something to go after that maybe they don't even understand what the value and meaning of all this is, but they're just trying to stir you up to see if you'll change your mind. So
for sure.
We talk about those strategies a lot. So whether it's from the prosecution or the defense, they're looking for things that will, get you to change your opinion.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, and I forget now, Becky, remind me, and maybe I don't know if you, after the fact, watch Jessica Hyde's testimony, but I know, and I can't remember if it was the first trial or second trial, but she talked about, and I'm inclined to think it was the first one, where she was verifying the hashes from the gray key report, and she mentioned it's not digitally signed versus Cellebrite extractions are digitally signed, and that she took the extra step of looking for any evidence of tampering with that gray key report that contained the hash. So wasn't that the first one that she talked about that? And she might have said it again in the second one for all I know. I can't remember. I'm living in 2024 right now.
I don't recall if Jessica said it. I know I said something along those lines in the second trial.
Oh, maybe it was you. I don't know.
The PDF essentially isn't signed, so you're trusting a PDF file that has the hash of the extraction. If you can go to the trouble of going into the extraction and changing the data, changing the hash in an unsigned PDF, child's play. So I didn't necessarily think that was any strong sign that it had not been validated versus actually looking at the files and, I've got all of this data that all works correctly and validates independently on its own. I don't need to validate the entire extraction.
So Ian, Where can people connect with you and follow your research online?
So I say earlier, my own website is doubleblack.com. Occasionally post research on there. I post the software that I occasionally write and release. It's all on there for free.
Awesome. They can just go out there and download it and use it and follow you and watch your updates and your research that you post.
Yeah, he's got, obviously there are a few blog posts related to the artifacts you examine related to the Karen Reed trial. So if our listeners want to know more about what you were looking at and some explanations about it, they should definitely visit your website and check out those blog posts.
Awesome. I tried in most of those posts as well to write it in a way that anybody would be able to follow along and do it. Certainly the browser state research, anybody in the world with an iPhone and a computer would be able to do that research on their own and replicate the results that I had. Some of the other data sources on there is obviously much harder without forensic extraction, but the browser state's easy enough.
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome.
That's great.
Well, Ian, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to share your knowledge with us and our listeners tonight. There was a lot of good tidbits in there for us. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, we really appreciate it. So join us every week on Thursday as we continue to dive into the Karen Reed's first trial, where next week we will be discussing more testimony. So make sure you subscribe, follow, or like wherever you listen to get notified when a new episode drops. Until next time, stay safe, stay sharp, and as always, keep parsing the truth one bite at a time.
If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to follow us to get notified the next time a new episode drops. If you can do more, head on over to parsingthetruth.com and donate by clicking on the donate button. Parsing the Truth is a nonprofit organization, and we are raising money to send a new digital forensic examiner to IASIS training next year in Orlando. Thanks.